Yo, what up, everybody? It's Force Phil here up on the track. So today, I figured I would do a quick recap. I mean, not quick. We're going to go through the entire round, but we're going to do a recap with commentary of my vintage Miracles deck that I played in Eternal Weekend Europe in Lucca. I was a round two feature match after winning round one, and I play against Underworld Breach PO on camera. This was on day one of Eternal Weekend and I was just interested in playing Miracles in every format. Now, what I really wanted to do was I just wanted to spin Sensei's Divining Tops. I didn't really have any expectations of going into Legacy. I put in 0 reps. I only had half power. I'm still in my process of collecting Altered Power. I'm missing some stuff. So as you can see on the screen right now, this is the list that I played in Lucca. This is on no testing, no reps. This is stuff that I had. It's actually a 61 card list just because I wanted to get the meme in of playing the Entreat the Angels. I wanted at least one of every miracle that I've played before reasonably in the deck. And so I have the one of Terminus, which is pretty good with Mystical Tutor, same thing with Entreat. And then I'm playing Triumph of St. Catherine's in the board for what I thought was going to be a difficult matchup in the initiative. And then I found as I was playing the day that having Luris in the sideboard and Wrath Effects actually is pretty good against initiative as it stands, as long as the initiative doesn't touch the table. But they have a lot of effects that you really don't care about too much, whether that's the Archon or the thing that taxes your spells. Like those things, they just get soloed by a Swords to Plowshares, which I was playing the full boat of, or a Terminus, which you have a couple of copies of with Mystical Tutor. Also with balance can just clear a table. What I actually found was that balance was underwhelming because I'm not playing too much artifact man. I really only have the one Mox Pearl here. I don't own the Mox. I'm sorry, one Mox Sapphire. I don't own the Mox Pearl yet, but I would have played a Pearl. The Soul Ring and the Black Lotus, and that's sort of it. Balance was sort of underwhelming for me on the day. I would have played a second Terminus. Terminus was actually pretty good. But going into the event, I didn't really have any expectations. I was just going to have fun spinning Sensei's Divining Tops. But then what I found was that playing counterbalance plus Sensei's Divining Top in your deck in a format that is pretty overwhelmingly dominated by Luris, not, dominated in that like it's the best deck or anything, but like it's the most popular thing. There's a bunch of variants of Luris that are all playing a lot of the same cards with some variations, like if you're Deathray Shaman or are you not, or you Lavinia, are you not, if you're just playing straight blue black. But all of them are Frog, all of them are Bowmaster. But when they show you a Luris, they turn face up what all of their threats cost for the most part. Like you're always going to be in 1 and 2s, and that's actually very good for counterbalance. And so when I stepped into the day, I wasn't expecting for anything to happen, and then I was like, my list, even on no testing and no reps, is actually more viable than I thought, just because counterbalance is actually very good against Luris matchups. And so here was the spread of what I played. If I were to go back again, what I would do is I'd probably find room for the second Terminus. I'd cut the Entreat. I'd probably find room for maybe a second Pierce, a second Prismatic Ending somewhere in the list. I would love to get the 4th Mystic Sanctuary in the list because it's just the best thing to be doing. It just means that your fetch land counters a spell with counterbalance on the table, and it's really powerful. And you don't need a win condition in the deck. Luris is a win condition, and you can go to EternalDurdles.com where I wrote about what I think a control deck should optimize toward, which is the infinite game theory, which Luris kind of solves for us in a way where the infinite game just means that you want to perpetuate the game as a goal rather than end it. And that's what I think control decks should strive to do, is they should strive to perpetuate the game rather than close the game, because anything that you're using to close the game is typically not going to help you survive. The goal of a control deck wants to be able to endure. And so if you're playing with the intention of an infinite game, then that is more suited, more aligned with what your card choices are going to be able to pay the most dividends over, like in most scenarios. And having Luris in the sideboard, meaning that you never have to waste a slot on a win condition. Typically what should happen is your opponent should just concede when they know that they're locked out by Sensei's Top, counterbalance, and a bunch of mana, and are not going to resolve any spells for the rest of the game. However, some players won't necessarily concede fast enough, but the fact that you can just always point to your Luris as the way that you can, quote-unquote, actually win the game means that you will always be able to outrace their will to play. And so you now no longer need to concern yourself with playing a win condition in the main deck, because Luris having lifelink is going to offset any way that you would ever be able to get burned out by like a Bowmaster or something. It's different. Like Kahira in Legacy is just not a good enough card. Just a generic 3/2 Vigilance is not good enough. But a 3/2 lifelink that can rebuy any of your pieces or put you up mana on Black Lotus, or rebuy the combo pieces here, or you can predict something into the yard and then rebuy it with Luris. Like Luris actually has quality text, and therefore you don't need to play win condition in your main board. So long-winded way of saying, like, if I could change this deck, I would probably play the second Prismatic Ending, the second Terminus. I would certainly play the Pearl and the Time Walk if I had them. I would love for a way to get the fourth Mystic Sanctuary and the fourth Counterbalance into the deck, because those are the best things to be doing. If you were looking to splash, I've seen people that have recommended going into red for a couple of different things like Flame of Venur or Pyroblast, or going into black because then you get Vampiric Tutor, which is also another a valuable piece with Counterbalance, and then you also get Demonic Tutor, obviously, which is great. We want more of those things, because with Mystic Sanctuary, being able to pick up those cards, being able to put your deck in your hands consistently is pretty good. But I think that, like, given the mana of you're playing against a lot of decks that are 5 Wasteland decks, they're playing the 4 Wastelands in the strip, that you actually would like to keep your mana base as clean as possible, so you don't get cut off. Maybe Mox Pearl can alleviate some of that pressure. But this is the list. This is what I played in Lucca. So let's get into the matchup where I'm playing against 4-color PO.
Finding the right high-end cards for legacy, vintage, pre-modern, or old-school Magic can be challenging. That's where friends 3-for-1 trading come in.
3-for-1 Trading is one of Europe's top Magic the Gathering retailers with an incredible selection of premium singles, sealed product, and even full sets, all available with free, fast, and secure worldwide shipping.
They add fresh inventory every Wednesday with weekly deals and discounts. So whether you're hunting for that elusive piece of power, a legacy staple, or something spicy for your collection, they've got you covered.
First high-end orders over $500 or €500, use the code EDFREE to get free worldwide shipping.
Check them out now at the number 3, the number 4, the number 1.gg/ED. That link takes you right to the shop and helps support the channel.
Huge thanks to 3-for-1 Trading for supporting the legacy community. Now back to the show.
I'm actually going to put this on 2x speed here. That way it's not too slow. We don't need to worry about if it'll let me go to 2x speed. It won't. Okay, so I can't go to 2x speed. I can't go to 2x speed. Okay, it must be something on the video then that's not letting me do this, but let's see. Starting out here on tapped land, I'm assuming that as I'm looking for a land here on top, I remember this hand. As long as I don't get wastelanded, we're going to have a game. But like getting to search for this, my hand was otherwise pretty good. I had the Sensei's Top in hand and the Soul Ring, and so I'm able to like actually generate some value. He starts on Jorgen, who's a very good player. He starts on Mox Emerald and Thundertrap Trainer. Thundertrap Trainer gets in. Now, one aspect about Counterbalance is in this format where there's a lot of like steep card draw, like Ancestral Recall and Paradoxical Outcome and all those things, those cards don't necessarily kill you. So if you can establish the Counterbalance lock, it doesn't matter how many cards they draw. The critical things won't resolve. And so, and their counter magic is not going to be able to interact with countertop when it's on the table. So as long as you can establish what, Miracles is trying to do, which is countertop, then any time they go up a ton of cards should just be irrelevant, because those things don't kill you. And as long as you're not dead, you're winning. And that's what I mean by a control deck optimizing towards the infinite game. As long as the game is being played, you're winning. That's like a good baseline of how to think about it. So I found the fetch land on top, so I play it. And that fetch land, you're going to see, I'm going to play it in a way that's like pretty conservative. Fetch lands are extremely powerful in a list that have both Sensei's Top and Mystic Sanctuary. Every fetch, the value of a shuffle or the value of a rebuy with a Mystic Sanctuary is just so high that in positions where you want to use it, you really, really don't want to get aggressive with your fetch lands. If you can sit on your fetch lands for a long period of time until it's in a pointed position where you're going to accrue a ton of value from it, either from actually 3 cards dead on top that you don't want to draw, or in a critical position where you just get a free counterspell because you're in the later stages of the game where you have the mana to turn on Mystic Sanctuary, that's just going to be a lot more valuable. So here I just play the Sensei's Top, and like this is a great opening. I have a bunch of mana and top, and I'm feeling ahead here, even though I'm certainly like playing on the back foot towards like what is the more powerful deck. So he plays his own Soul Ring, and I believe I snap off a Mental Misstep here. I have the Spell Pierce in hand, and so I'm looking for ways to like convert that Pierce in a way that is viable for me, but I am looking for countertop. So like what I like about Sensei's Divining Top in Miracles, besides the fact that it's obviously very good, is that it does give you a proactive plan with your control list. Like you always know that you're looking for countertop. That's the thing that you sit down at the table looking to establish. And so if you're pondering or if you're topping, like typically what you're doing is you want to find counterbalance in the blind. That's what you're always looking to do. And so I'm mental misstepping this Soul Ring here, just trying to slow the mana production down. Thundertrap Trainer is a nod to suggesting that we're on a PO list of some kind. And so I know about Laris, and so this is giving this away. And so being able to turn off mana rocks is going to be helpful to slow down the power of a PO. And Jorgen agreed. He forced, I don't forget exactly what he pitched, but I have this Pierce, but he could pay for that Pierce. And so I decided not to pick the battle over it. Right now, if he were to try and go PO right now with his 4 mana, he would lose to Pierce. And so he's obviously got to dance around that. I don't know what's in his hand. I don't know that he has this paradoxical outcome. But he's trying to think about what is the optimized time to convert it. And he's playing around Pierce and playing around Fluster pretty well. Those are known cards in Vintage. Those are played cards commonly in main decks. And so knowing to play around them is not something that you have to be like, oh, are they or are they not playing it? If you're playing a blue deck of some kind, it is very likely that you are playing some number of Pierce main, if not Fluster. And then, and I'm also playing a Brew, right? Like he doesn't necessarily know what he's up against. Seeing blue-white lands with top, he sees Lurrus. I might just be on some Lurrus deck. He might be thinking that I'm on combo at this point still, but he doesn't know that I'm necessarily on hard control yet. Everything is outside of the top and maybe the Meticulous Archive, which I think is pretty stock now, is not unusual. Now, in this position, he has enough mana that he decides to go for the PO in my upkeep, which I think is reasonable, because if he has Fluster, he can sacrifice the Petal. He'll still be able to draw 3 cards and pay for the Fluster. And that Fluster being out of my hand is also really valuable if he gets to pick up a bunch of cards and then redeploy into another PO. And so it's in this position. I knew that the top of my deck was Mox Sapphire, Terminus, and some other card that I didn't want. And so the value of this fetch increases by cleaning that up. Fetch land plus Sensitive Divining Top is essentially just looking at Ponder, because you can always flip the top for another card. And we'll talk about, like, once counter top is established, what the value of a top sitting on the table versus actually activating the top to flip it back on top of the deck to draw a card is. Soul Ring gets to look at the top card. This is exactly what I was looking for when I fetched here. I'm looking for either my own piece of counter magic to fight on the stack here and protect this Pierce, or find this counterbalance, because if he's picking up a bunch of mana, this Pierce is going to be able to protect this counterbalance. And so I'm just thinking through the sequence here of like, okay, I have this Brainstorm. What are the odds that, like, I need to play around a Force of Negation if he plays into something? I don't have a 3-drop that I can put on top of this counterbalance, or a way to protect my own stuff. So if he draws into a second piece of counter magic, I have right now with only 1 land here when I try and deploy this counterbalance, and this is the sequence that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at those top 3 cards, that I'll be able to protect through the first piece of counter magic with this Pierce. And being able to play a proactive Pierce is really, really powerful. I think proactive counter magic is always going to be better than reactive counter magic. And so he's up a bunch of cards, and he understands that, like, now that he's shown me a bunch of what he's put in his hand to stack for the countertop, that this countertop can't resolve. He doesn't want it. He's going to have to fight over this. I'm going to snap off this Pierce, obviously. Like, this is exactly the kind of scenario that I want to get into. He didn't have random mana yet, so getting rid of the Flame of Venur as a more expensive thing seems like the reasonable out here. I know about the Thunder Trap Trainer, I know about a Soul Ring, and I know about the Mox Emerald. So I had thought about, okay, once the counterbalance is down, how do I stack my deck? That way, the tricky parts about countertop are always when you are mana tight. So you have to think about, like, a sequence of 3 to 6 plays ahead of, okay, how do you optimize for a position where you need to establish countertop, but you don't have a ton of mana. When you have a ton of mana plus countertop, it becomes a lot easier, right? Like, okay, now every mana that you have just counters a spell. But when you're in tighter mana positions, figuring out, okay, how do I navigate through? This is a sequence and what I want to talk about pretty clearly. So in this spot, I have a 0 on top. He led with the Petal, and he sees a Mox Sapphire on top. Now, here's a position where I decided not to activate the top to put it back on top, because I know about the Emerald that's still in hand. So I can fight over the Soul Ring by flipping the top back on top. But if I move the top back to 1, then in response to that top, if he has any 1 mana interaction, whether that's a way to remove either of my permanents, if that's an Ancestral Recall, if that's a Mystical Tutor, like, in response to me activating the top, he knows that there's a window while that activation is on the stack that he can start doing things. And those are the things that can kill me. Mana isn't necessarily going to kill me. I would like to bottleneck his mana as much as possible, but now that the Pierce is out of my hand, there isn't really anything that I'm trying to convert in my hand. And so there is a debate here that I should activate this top to try and counter this Soul Ring. But I know about the Mox Emerald that's still in his hand. He didn't pick that up. And so as long as I have this Mox Sapphire on top of my deck, I know that he's not going to be able to deploy that Sapphire. So now I'm looking at, okay, he could potentially have 4 mana, but he also pitched a Flame of Venur, so I know that, like, this stuff is, he's not going to necessarily fetch a red source with this. And if he does, that means he has a second Flame of Venur, and that's his first one, and he wouldn't be able to hit the top if I don't activate it, right? So if I'm playing around Flame of Venur, I don't activate the top. If I'm playing around something like Ancestral or Mystical Tutor, I don't activate the top. And that's a situation where when you're light on mana, when you tap your top, when you put it sideways and say I'm taking this game action, that's a shields down moment, right? Like with no mana and tapping top, that's a shields down moment, and that's a huge vulnerability. And I'm right now we're not in a position where I feel like I am ahead with countertop on the table. And even if I give him some reprieve of being able to redeploy some of the stuff, I don't necessarily think that that's going to be a losing position for me, because right now he has to be the one to try and break through the countertop lock. I am ahead here. And so while I could absolutely see an argument, and I wouldn't necessarily fault somebody if they were like, okay, I'm going to activate the top here to counter the Soul Ring, I didn't think that this was a position where I felt secure enough to take that action. I thought I was, after he had just PO'd, and I don't know a lot of the cards in his hand. I knew about the pedal that isn't necessarily going to matter now, or wasn't going to matter after he, it gets countered. But like the rest of the cards in hand, I know about a Thunder Trap Trainer. If he Thunder Traps into, if I put a 1 on top off of Sensei's top, then that Thunder Trap Trainer gets to come back down and potentially convert another Mox or a Black Lotus or something, and then he could just start going off, right? Because if he goes, I didn't know about the Underworld Breach in hand, but if he just goes off on 2 mana spells, I understand that even though I don't necessarily know that he's on Breach yet, it's one of the things I'm certainly thinking about. And the way that Breach wins is they go Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze target itself, and then eventually Brain Freeze you. And the way that they can do that is by looping a Black Lotus or looping a bunch of Moxen. And if I put a 1 on top, they can just play through the countertop with a 1 on top, because the stuff that matters to them are 0s and 2s. And so it's just too high of a, it's too risky to me to fight over this Soul Ring in this spot. And I get that it's really deep, but this is a really, like, we breezed through this interaction pretty fast because I declined pretty fast. But I think that this is a really, really deep decision point right here that I'm not sure if Jorgen also thought that I was maybe didn't see that I could do that line or wasn't interested in doing that line. But either way, there's a lot of information given by this Soul Ring getting to resolve. And I think that's part of like why Counterbalance is such a cool dance, because I am giving up information by not flipping the top, right? Or it's a sign of weakness on my end that I don't want to flip the top, or it's a sign of strength that I don't want to flip the top. It's so, there's so many layers to it that it becomes a really interesting decision point, but there's a lot of information that could potentially be gleaned from this moment. And so that's why I'm stopping to highlight it, because if you're saying, why did you flip the top? I think there's total argument for it, but I think that there's enough argument to not do it and stay shields up, because now I'm countering potentially 0s and 1s in a more vulnerable position, as opposed to just countering 1s and then leaving the door open with no mana up to rearrange. So this resolves. Can't deploy the Mox Emerald that's still in his hand that I know about, but he does get to resolve this Thunder Trap Trainer, and I don't have ways to interact here, so that Thunder Trap Trainer gets to resolve. And it's another one of those spots where, like, yes, he gets to go up another card. The Thunder Trap Trainer is not something that I really care about. In this position, why is he looking at 5 cards? Oh, this is stock up. That's why. So stock up. He's going to be able to go up 2 cards. It's the same rationale, though, to the Thunder Trap Trainer. If he goes up a bunch of cards, stock up is not the thing that kills me as long as I have countertop on the table. I would be way more fearful of this stock up if I didn't have counterbalance established. But since I do, I don't have to worry nearly as much, because I still control the narration of the game here, right? Like, I have the narrative. He has to find a way to disrupt it or break through it. But the onus is on him to solve the problem. I do not need to solve the problem. My problems are being solved right now. He's got to find a way to navigate through it. And he's not going to be able to do that as long as I have countertop on the table. And so, or if there's like a huge string of me having a bunch of issues. But I've been sitting on a Brainstorm in my hand since turn 1. And I know that that's similar to fetch lands, a last resort for me. I don't want to have to use that Brainstorm unless I have to. And we get into a position later on where I end up using it, and I'll show you like where there's some discrepancy here and why, like, even after I've been playing Miracles for over a decade, how there's so much nuance and so many decision trees. I think I punted a handful of times in this game in spots where like you could probably play a lot tighter.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
So this is a position here. This one was really interesting, and I think that this might have been a spot where, not having played against Counterbalance, Jorgen might have realized that like this is just it's a position where it's like, okay, he's throwing out this portable hole to try and hit this Counterbalance, but by me not activating the top, I now can counter this 1-drop. And of course, this is a position where, because I don't have a prismatic ending in my top 3 cards, and these 2 cards in my hand are not going to solve that problem, this is going to force my hand to spin this top, or rather flip this top. And then once that top is flipped, then he's going to have access to do whatever he wants. But because he played stock up in the same turn, he's going to be mana light. He'll be able to convert any Moxen he has in hand. But this is a position where I go, like, by not having moved this Soul Ring, this might just be like, lack of reps against countertop. But the Soul Ring resolved, and I didn't flip the top. So maybe he's thinking, oh, he's not flipping the top. Maybe he doesn't think that I realize that I can flip the top. But I know that I can do this like pretty quickly as a way to counter 1-drops. So I just announced the trigger to make sure that it's all clear, because we're on camera. And then here we have, I'm going to draw this Pearl. I'm going to put this on top. I'm going to counter this, and then he's going to be able to deploy any additional free counter magic, and then free mana, and then potentially convert this Thunder Trap Trainer. But again, as long as I have counterbalance, he can't go off on ones. And on mana tight, he's going to. So here he's thinking about passing the turn. By not passing the turn, I'm also gleaning what could potentially be in his hand. I'm like, oh, is he got additional Moxen? Like, is he counting mana and thinking that he's light? So him having all those cards that he had drawn, I'm thinking about Force of Negation as a card that I need to consider playing around. So here, I put Lurrus into my hand. Now, the decision to put Lurrus in my hand is I am consciously thinking I need to play around Force of Negation, because he could fight over the top, and then I'm going to be at odds, because if I don't have top in addition to counterbalance, all of the cards that he's drawn then will be able to bully me around, because he'll be able to check the top card. I won't be able to manipulate the top card anymore. And then if he can play through that top card, it's a lot easier to play through just counterbalance on the table. So I put Lurrus in my hand because I have the Brainstorm, and so now I can brainstorm in response to his opposing Force Negation on my top, counter it, and then I will have access to counter 3s by putting the putting the Lurrus on top, and 1s because I'll have the counterbalance, or I'll have Sensei's Divining Top plus counterbalance. Now I haven't made a land drop yet, and so there's also the possibility of that. I'm doing this now to play around Force Negation, but by doing so, in my head, I'm like, I am turning this Brainstorm in my hand face up. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that like I am taking the conservative line here by putting the Lurrus into my hand, because one of my cards is dead. It's a Swords Plowshares, and the other one is Brainstorm. By putting the Lurrus into my hand without anything that I want to retrieve from the table, it's possible that like maybe Jorgen might talk himself into thinking that I'm just getting the Lurrus into my hand. That way, if he fights over the top with something that's not Force Negation, that I could then rebuy it with Lurrus on the following turn. But in my head, I'm like, I just need to play around a Force Negation, and so I'm putting the Lurrus into my hand. But by doing that, I'm turning my Brainstorm face up. And that's information that is tough to glean in some instances, but in my mind, as I'm sitting there, I'm like, my Brainstorm is now face up. Now, that is still really powerful. Like, having a counterbalance plus a Brainstorm is still a powerful interaction, even if it's known. He's going to have to pick and choose and try and bait me to play that Brainstorm, but me having access to it is still really powerful with counterbalance, but it's a lot softer now that it's known information. In my head, it is now known information. So he knows about the Mox Sapphire. There's an argument that I'm supposed to play the Mox Sapphire first, but again, there's like, by playing more spells, I don't want to turn on mind break traps that are possible in these types of lists. Like there's a lot of cool sequencing in Vintage that I'm like trying to play around, and I'm on no rep, so I'm sort of flying by the seat of my pants from like what I remember and what I know, and then like muscle memory on Miracles. So here we saw on that I have the Swords Plowshares, a land, and a Force Negation. I'm happy to see multiple CMCs on top of my deck and a 0 on top that I can use to counter additional Moxen. So I put that land on top because I only have 1 mana here open. And if I can catch the 0s as his bait spells, that's going to be great. And then I can manipulate the top. And also, so I can counter 0s, 1s, and 3s here. And again, this is a tight mana sequence. I only have 1 mana to play. But I also can counter 1s and 3s from the Brainstorm that's in my hand. So here he's casting another PO. When he was tapping 3, I was like, oh, I should have played the Force Negation on top to fight over. But then when he goes off for another Paradoxical Outcome, I don't have a way to play around this. Now, this ends up being a Thunder Trap Trainer if I had stacked a 2. Now, I don't have a 2 on top. I would spin to put the 2 on top to counter this if I had it. But because I don't, this just gets to resolve. He gets to go up an additional 3 cards on the second body plus 2 impulses. Again, I have the countertop lock. I'm not worried about him going up a ton of cards. He isn't going to be able to win as long as I have counterbalance on the table, because the threat of a 0 mana spell on top to counter anything that Underworld Breach could get back, or 2 mana to counter the Underworld Breach, is still too dense And I am actually up reasonably on some number of these cards because the Flusterstorm is not relevant. Well, I have countertop on the table. That's not an interactive point. The Force of Will is not an interactive point. I have free interaction here. Free being like they can't be countered. It still costs mana. But the onus is still on him to figure out how to break through this. And I'm just thinking, okay, what are the optimized ways that we're going to be able to keep him in line from being able to go over the top of me in a sequence? And the other part about Thundertrap Trainer that makes it so it's pretty valuable for me is this is known information. He's showing me a 2 and a 4. So in positions where I have known informations to critical spells and critical CMCs in hand, that's also really valuable for counterbalance. It's something that I learned over the course of this day. I didn't think that I was going to have much gameplay with the deck that I played. But by a lot of the cards, whether it's Luris or whether it's Thundertrap Trainer or whether it's PO picking up a bunch of things, you see a bunch of CMCs and you see a bunch of spells in your opponent's hand. And that information is so crucial. Now that I have this fetch land on the table, I have free access to counter 1-mana spells for free here in my list, and I'm looking for a 2-drop to fight over. I would love to find a predict in this spot. I would love to just like maximize the number of CMCs that I can convert off of this now Mystic Sanctuary that I have face up on the table. He's not a Wasteland deck, so I know he's not going to be able to cut me off of this. And so by having both countertop lock plus this fetch land is so powerful in this spot. It representing another free counterspell in addition to a shuffle means that like the hooks are synced in. Like I stacked this on top because it's what I wanted to draw last turn before spinning again. And now that I have it, like we are so high. Now he's baiting off a 1. I know I can counter a 1, but I don't want to waste the shuffle, and I know that I have a Swords to Plowshares on top. And so I put it there. Finding that Merchant Scroll is excellent. That's the 2-drop that I want. It's another shuffle effect, which is exquisite. So with the counterbalance trigger here on the stack, he's thinking about if he wants to do something else. I have the mana floating from this Soul Ring, which is also really valuable because if he wants to continue a sequence, I get to use that mana. And if he wants to move to combat, I get to spend that mana again and potentially move my stack around, which right now has the Swords to Plowshare on top. I can move it back to put the Merchant Scroll on top. That way, post-combat, if he tries to deploy that Demonic Tutor that I know about, I'll be able to catch it for free without wasting this mana. So the Swords to Plowshares is revealed. Counters the Mana Crypt. Or, I'm sorry, the Mana Vault. Now, this is an interesting line. He decides not to move to combat first. And I'm not exactly sure the reasons for that. But by moving here to play a second thing, I get to use this mana to spin and put a 2 on top to counter the Demonic Tutor that I know about, unless he wants to do something else. But I think he catches himself and then he decides to move to combat. And before he will do that, I'm going to spend this mana to then float the 2 because I know about the Demonic Tutor, and he knows that I know about the Demonic Tutor. So leading on the Demonic Tutor, it becomes this dance of like, do you believe that I am at the level where I'm going to stack a 2 on top if I have a 2 on top? Now, he knows I didn't have a 2 on top before when he went for the Thundertrap Trainer, so that would be new information of the card down below if I had it. I do have it, so I stack it on top. He decides to pass turn, so I'm going to float again. And what's really nice is like I don't have to move on this Merchant Scroll until he decides to deploy the Demonic Tutor into it. So this is again during my upkeep. I have a 3 on top. He decides to go for another PO. I don't really have any 4-drops in my deck to really fight over this, but it's the same thing as the stock up. It's the same thing as the Thundertrap Trainer. In this spot, I think this was a mistake. So I know I have a Force Negation on top. I spin my top here to fight over this paradoxical outcome because this is, in my head, I want to be able to use this Merchant Scroll. In my head, it's going to Merchant Scroll for a Ancestral so I can like match parity with him on cards. But I think that it was just a mistake to turn this top, and I did it really fast because I really wanted to like be able to convert. In my head, I don't need this 3 on top because I have the Luris and Brainstorm in hand, and he knows about the Brainstorm. So he's not going to walk a 3 into my known Brainstorm plus Luris, and my hand is otherwise now face up except for the blank Swords to Plowshares that I haven't moved, and is also not really relevant. And so this is a position where I think on my turn, I'm going to be able to draw. This is my upkeep, so I'm going to be able to draw the top. And so I'm also thinking really fast here because I know that like clock is always going to be a factor. And so I flip the top really aggressively here to draw the Force Negation, fight over the paradoxical outcome. But it opens the door because it means that, again, he could then fight over the top, or he could play something that blows up my counterbalance, or he could try and do something in additional. But I think I do it in this spot because he's mana light. So he doesn't have a 3rd mana to do a Flame of Anor to like blow up my top in response to me flipping it. There's a bunch of little nuance here that I think this is a reasonably safe line, but I could also see a world where somebody thinks that what I'm doing here is pretty aggressive, and I agree that it is an aggressive line. that maybe is not the optimal way to go about things. Now, this is still 2 spells. He could fluster. He has that fluster in hand. He's saving it. But if he flustered this force negation, that would require me to tap both my Soul Ring and my land, and then crack the fetch if I want to redeploy the top. I would just let it go. I would not fight over that force. I would just let him draw the cards, and then I'd draw my top, and then I'd spin the top as exactly as I'm doing now. Because I know that there are these cards on top. I mean, I don't know about the predict, that's new information, but I knew about the Merchant Scroll. And the Merchant Scroll is not something I want to get rid of. I want that Merchant Scroll because that Merchant Scroll finds me Ancestral, and then that Ancestral is now going to be able to get picked up later on by a potential Mystic Sanctuary, and that's my way to vert all of the cards that I've let him go up. I now can match him parity on cards, thinking down the line. So I'm thinking that Merchant Scroll is going to counter this Demonic Tutor, and then it's going to find me an Ancestral, and then that Ancestral eventually is going to get picked up by a Mystic Sanctuary, and that's where we're going to be. So here, I set up, drawing the Predict, I want the Predict because I want to clear that Source of Plowshares off the top of my deck. Getting to find this Predict on top, I get to stack it because it's what I want to draw, and I'm still in a relatively mana tight position, even though I have this Mystic Sanctuary to counter anything. But that Predict being able to clear the top of my deck is really powerful, and also it lets me interact at instant speed to clear the top to get in. Once we're in a higher mana situation, like once I have a ton of mana plus counter top on the table plus a Predict in hand, it really means that now my top can dig 5 cards deep, right? I can look at 5 cards, and really I'm going to have access to counter anything I want, and then the Cinchers are going to be in, and then we get into the territory where it like makes more sense for my opponent to scoop rather than play the game, because they're not going to resolve another spell for the rest of the game. So in this spot, I'm using the Source of Plowshares to clear the board because I realize that the hooks are starting to sink in, and once I can just keep up mana and not have my life total under any real duress, we're going to have a lot of like playable action. Now, here's another spot where I think like I could have played a lot tighter. And I remember this sequence. So I don't have a 3 on top of my deck, but I do have a Force Negation in my yard that I can fetch this Mystic Sanctuary, but I want these cards on top of my deck. So here's where I end up spending the Brainstorm that I've had literally in my hand since my opening hand. And this is information where I'm like, I don't want to spend this Brainstorm, because as long as he knows that I have Brainstorm, which I thought I turned face up essentially when I bought the Lyris, I'm going, if I'm like, I want to be able to use the Brainstorm in a spot that is like, this is really like my jab uppercut, right? Like my Brainstorm is the uppercut to like really lock out anything that you could potentially do once I have a ton of mana. Having this 3-drop on top after he sees me flip the Force Negation, him doing this, I'm thinking he's going, okay, I'm going to bait the Brainstorm, put the Lyris on top, and then I'm going to try and have an additional fight sequence here. I don't know if it was correct to use the Brainstorm here. I think there's a possibility of him going after the Soul Ring. Like, I have a bunch of mana, even though the Soul Ring is mana that I want. If he goes crack this thing, draw 2 cards, it might be totally fine to just let that happen. Like, I don't need the Soul Ring anymore. I have enough mana plus a fetch that is representing Mystic Sanctuary and cards on top of my deck that I want, that if he just goes up an additional couple of cards with 2 cards in hand, I don't know what these cards in hand are, but like if he gets rid of this and draws 2 cards, what do I care? So I think me using this Brainstorm, it's arguable that this was not a position where the Flame of Anor warranted it. You know, like I could see a world where it's like, why do you, like somebody could easily say, Phil, why do you care about this Flame of Anor? And the argument might be, I just don't. And using the Brainstorm here to fight over this Flame of Anor because I'm feeling the hooks sinking in, it's just an aggressive use of Brainstorm. And I don't think I need to necessarily do it. Now, this is a spot, I know the Lyris is going back on top, but I'm thinking, okay, well, do I want to continue floating a 2 because I'm going to use this Predictor? Do I want to use this stuff? But I realize this Lyris is going to be able to contain this token, and I don't want this Source of Plowshares as a result of that, and I want to be able to turn through my deck a little bit faster with this Predict to clear the way. So this is another spot where I could have spun to look at the additional bottom cards as opposed to predicting right now, but I don't want the Source of Plowshares, and I know I have 1 coverage with this top. What I would really like is to find maybe a second top, because once I have a second top on the table, I have 1 mana counter magic for free, and that's really appealing. But in this spot, I'm like, additionally, any fetch land is a second Mystic Sanctuary, and then that, once I have the second Mystic Sanctuary, I know there's no way that there was spells resolving for the rest of the game, especially now that I have a 2-drop in the yard. Now that I have Predict in the yard, I have 1's locked out with this Mystic Sanctuary, 2's locked out with this Mystic Sanctuary, 3's with the Force Negation locked out with this Mystic Sanctuary. Like, there's nothing that's going to resolve that I care about from this board state. And so I could see why, like, with that Brainstorm, it's arguable that I didn't actually need to deploy it. Now, I think I'm still way ahead here, and so it's not a huge deal, but it is an argument where it's like, okay, you could have probably played a little bit tighter, because now I'm drawing off of those predicts. That predict is drawing some blind cards, where I could have spun to see if the 2 cards underneath the Swords to Plowshares are cards that I actually wanted. So maybe the Swords to Plowshares, because it does have a target and is something that I could just convert at any point, maybe it's other lands that aren't fetch lands that I don't want. And those are cards that, like, with my Brainstorm now in my graveyard, I don't have a way to put back on top of my deck. So, like, without having a bunch of Brainstorms in your deck like you did in No Legacy, if you have cards in hand, it's likely that those cards are going to stay in hand. And I don't necessarily want to spend my Mystic Sanctuary on this Brainstorm, because I have the Merchant Scroll in hand. In my head, I'm thinking, okay, that Merchant Scroll is still going to get me the Ancestral, and that Ancestral is going to be the better target for my Mystic Sanctuary. So these positions are just stuff that I don't want to engage in. Here I have another 2 on top. I have a 1 on top. We are pretty covered here. And again, this is spots where we're still playing it out. He's still playing it out because he does have this Underworld Breach that has not yet deployed. Once this comes down, once the breach comes down, once I spin the top, he should scoop. Once I reveal this 2-drop, he should scoop. Now we're in a position where, unless he has another Underworld Breach in his hand, I don't see a rationale for why this game should continue. In his head, he's like, okay, I have this Lurrus, but in my mind, I know I have 3 drops covered with this fetch hitting a Force Negation. Now, it's fair to say, okay, you're playing Miracles in Vintage. I don't know that you have a Mystic Sanctuary in your deck that you're going to fetch and put this 3 on top. And I also think that it is arguable that in this spot, because I had the Swords to Plowshares in my hand, and he's got no mana, that I should not do what I'm about to do. I'm thinking the game is over. The game is over. He should scoop. We should go to the next game. But I'm thinking, once I play this Mystic Sanctuary down, and don't get me wrong, I'm having a blast doing this. Like, I'm amazed that, like, my deck is actually holding its own in Vintage, and it's it's untested and no reps. But once I show this Mystic Sanctuary targeting the Force Negation, I'm expecting scoop. When that doesn't happen, I go, okay, well, now it's actually not optimized. Like, I liked the cards that were on top of my deck. I don't think it was reasonable for me to spend this Mystic Sanctuary on converting on that Lurrus, because I have the swords in hand. And now the cards on top of my deck are way worse than that predict that was on top of my deck before I fetched. So I think that was a mistake. Now, that's me thinking in my head, maybe I got a little too big for my britches there. But in my head, I'm like, there's just no way that I don't get the concession after countering the Lurrus, considering that I have Lurrus in my hand. So once I go Merchant Scroll for Ancestral, any of these positions, any of these actions now, with mana, with countertop plus mana, plus a bunch of cards in hand off of this Ancestral, I think any of these are reasonable spots to scoop. But at the same time, my opponent is playing against a brew. They don't necessarily know what else they need to play around. So it's totally reasonable from his seat to be like, I'm going to play this out for a little bit longer until you actually show me a kill, because I need more information as to, like, how I'm supposed to sideboard. Who knows what other things I might be playing. And he gets some of that information, because you'll see later on I show him a second Mystic Sanctuary, and that's what this Scalding Tarn represents. So having that information is also super reasonable, because now I'm showing him that I'm a little bit more dense on things that care about the graveyard. So maybe he wants to bring in some graveyard hate. Like, it's totally reasonable to continue playing this out. Now, here I'm thinking, I need to end this game. Like, I'm surprised that he hasn't scooped yet, so I'm thinking I need to deploy this Lurrus just so I can get this game done. But now that I'm like, okay, hold on a second, I need to slow down. If he didn't scoop before, I should probably, like, start making actual game actions to, like, play this infinite game that I know I can play, because I know that now it's on me to lose this game if I'm going to lose it. So this game is locked up. All I need to do is not mess it up on my own. And you see me sort of, like, stutter putting here, because I'm like, I'm expecting a scoop. I wasn't expecting to have to play any more turns. And now we're playing a bunch more. And then I start picking the pace back up. Once I realize, okay, we're committed to playing this game, I'm going to have to deploy this Lurrus and start attacking. Because he wants some information. So you saw me, like, do a little pump fake actions on that last turn. But now that I have all of this mana, this game is locked up. I have Mystic Sanctuary on the table with a full graveyard. At any point, I can rebuy this Ancestral if I need to go up cards. I have actually, I'm playing two more Mystic Sanctuaries in my deck in this matchup. So I have 2 Mystic Sanctuaries on the table. So it's free counterspell on this fetch, free counterspell on this fetch, plus all of this mana, plus relevant CMCs on top of my deck, and he no longer really has a grip. So this game is hard locked in my mind. There's no way that I'm losing this game unless I give it to him. And now that I've shown him a win condition, there's no way that I'm losing this. So fight over this thing, counter it. I'm probably looking at the lack of a 2-drop on top of my deck, and so I'm thinking if I want to spend one of these, if I want to predict and then spin again, or if I want to just fetch and put another predict on top of my deck and then continue churning that way, because the 2 drops are going to be more valuable in these positions. This, I think, is a soft spot. I don't think I should be doing this. I should have just cracked a fetch there. I probably liked the cards that were on top of my deck and didn't want to mess with that. But like, again, me flipping that top, I think is just way, way, way too aggressive. With more reps, like getting back into the swing of things, I don't think I make that move right there. I think I either let the thing resolve because I have this Luris that's checking it, or fetch and put a predict back on top of my deck and counter it that way, and then just spin from there. And then I now have the predict to clear any chafe, and it's foolproof. I think flipping the top there is just a mistake. It worked out, like he didn't have any means to interact with that, but like I think it was just a punt. I don't think that was a good turn from how I played that one. And here I have a Mystical Tutor. Mystical Tutor is also 1-mana counterspell. And here's an example of like when I realized that flipping that top on the last turn was a punt. I recognized last turn that was a mistake. I just should not have done it. And this turn I could have just flipped the top again to draw the Mystical Tutor. And then I'm like, okay, well, I should just fetch at that point. I can see, like, I remember thinking like there was some amount of sloppiness from that last turn when I was aggressive with that top. But I'm like, I know that I need to race against the clock. I know that this match is drawn up. I have the win condition on the table. Now, the only thing that I'm contending against is I either have to cross the finish line fast enough, or I have to actually crack his will from being able to continue this game. In his head, he's like, well, I have this chain of vapor on the table, and this chain might be able to get through this counterbalance. And now he also gained more information. So me showing him the second Mystic Sanctuary is also like, damn, okay, well, if he's going to show me more information, then this is actually valuable for me to continue playing it out. So I hit him with Luris again, and I know that this thing is drawn up, and I just want to close this game, and I make another punt in this game at the top, and we're about to see it here. So my top cards were Predict, Entreat. He goes Stock Up. I know about Entreat on top of my deck. So I spin this. I left the 2 on top, but now I'm going to show the Entreat on top. So I Entreat, show him the Entreat, counter the Stock Up. Now I'm like, I can make enough angels off of this Entreat at instant speed to just kill him. That doesn't play around anything like a Pierce or a Fluster, which, you know, he might just be sitting with dead counter magic in his hand, right? So, like, it doesn't make sense to do this. And then this is just like, I think this is my biggest mistake of the whole round. Me spinning this, I'm so ahead. I already have my win condition on the table. There is no need for me to move. I have a Force of Will underneath this in my top 3 that I can just draw on my turn. I do not need to move. I have a fetch for a Mystic Sanctuary that's countering everything. He is hard locked. Me doing this exposes myself. So I say flip the top. I'm moving fast because I want to just close this game. He goes, hold on, in response to your top activation. I'm like, okay, in response to top activation. The top is on a stack. This is where it gets so bad for me, right? Like, by doing this, what we talked about before, I'm exposing myself. I'm just leaving myself open to any amount of interaction. And that's what happens here. He just tries to go, okay, I'm going to chain your counterbalance. And now I have to take like these game actions that I don't want to have to take, right? Because I'm thinking I'm still going to flip this thing. But I find this force, and I'm like, okay, well, what I can do with multiple predicts in hand is I'm just going to predict away this Entreat because I didn't even need it in the first place. So now I'm trying to overcome for the fact that I just punted. So I'm like, okay, I'm thinking through the sequence of I'm going to predict, name Entreat, draw this force this thing, and then hopefully that'll get a concession. I'm thinking so fast here, and also trying to like compensate for my punt that my brain skips ahead. So like you see me like flick my hand right there. What happened was my brain got ahead of that sequence. So I knew that, okay, I shouldn't have tried to flip the top in the first place. So now I'm thinking, okay, I need to be able to like compensate for that, like overcome the fact that I just punted. It's okay. I'm way ahead. We'll be okay. So I'm thinking I'm going to predict away this Entreat and draw this force, and then I'm going to force will the chain of vapor. But I'm thinking, so I'm trying to move so quickly because I have this game locked up and I want to get to play the second and third games if needed, that I predict, and out of my mouth I say force of will when I wanted to say Entreat. But I knew that the sequence was predict away the Entreat, force of will your chain of vapor. And I'm thinking so fast that my brain literally skipped ahead of my mouth, where it jumped ahead to when I force of will the chain of vapor. And so as force of will, the words left my mouth. I'm like, no, that, because I know my sequence in my head is like, it's Entreat, then force. It's very clear. It's not difficult. This is known information. But the words out of my mouth say force of will. And so now that I've voiced force of will, I can't take it back and say, wait a minute, Entreat the angels. I already set a card. And if I wanted to restack, I would have to have like spun another mana to restack. That's a game action that would have been legals. it was just a mistake on a bunch of different levels that then cost me a card on this predict because I got ahead of myself, and I shouldn't have even been in this position in the first place. So this was just really poor play on my part, and I think that this is like just man, like if I could go back and redo this whole sequence, I just never would have touched that top. Just never would have tried to flip that top, because now we're just in this exact same position that we were in before, where I have this established. My win condition is on the table. I just did not need to do any of what I was doing. And now we're hard locked. He's got one card in hand. He's still not scooping. And I just need to make sure that I don't make another mistake like that and punt. So I'm still looking for, it would be nice to find a second top. That way I can have those positions where I don't need to worry about that anymore. He draws a Lorien Revealed. He casts a Lorien Revealed. I believe I have another 5-drop on top. And even if I didn't, I could fetch and put the Force Will back on top of my deck. I do have the Force there. I show him the Force. I could have fetched Mystic Sanctuary for Force, which would have probably got a concession. The fact that this Force Will doesn't draw the concession and he doesn't have any cards in hand, this is really just, in my mind, like information from him. And so I'm moving still now relatively fast. I have 3 turns. Drawing and passing. Just moving quick here. These are blanks, but I'm countering 1-drops. I know I have this Mystic Sanctuary still on the table to counter anything else. We're hard locked here. This is a judge call. He accidentally picked up 2 cards, so let's breeze through this a little bit. And then right after that judge call, he draws his card and then he scoops. So then we go to game 2. In times of financial uncertainty, how can you stay on track? Call someone who's invested in your success. Nick Ropp, your Edward Jones financial advisor and certified financial planner, is here to help you. He will work to build a complete picture of your financial life, including your unique goals and passions, so he can help you achieve what's most important to you. Call Nick Ropp at 314-377-9524 or email nicholas.ropp@edwardjones.com to schedule an appointment today. That's 314-377-9524 or email nicholas@edwardjones.com. Edward Jones member, SIPC. Excuse me. In game 2, we're going to see the power of some vintage cards and why, you know, sometimes you just get coast to coasted by singleton cards. So we're about to see an example of that. So here he goes turn 1 Vexing Bauble, and that blanks so much of my hand. And we'll see as we go through this game, we could do some amount of like. This game has a lot less intricacy to it because this Vexing Bauble just sort of commands the game. There's a bunch of actions that happen here, but I need to find my 1 prismatic ending to get rid of this Vexing Bauble if I'm going to be able to convert anything that I have, or I'm going to need to establish counterbalance. So looking at what I have the Ancestral in hand, but I'm thinking, what is the opportune time to deploy it? All of the stuff he knows is going to resolve because he has Vexing Bauble. He's the proactive deck, so a Vexing Bauble is a lot better for him than it is for me. Because he just wants to be able to establish Underworld Breach and kill me. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here, just because we're playing a game where I have like Pierce, Jataxian Probe, like all of these things. I have to spend mana on stuff to here, and this is my spot where I think this was a punt. I go after his mana because I don't have enough to deal with the Vexing Bauble, and in my head, I'm thinking if I can. This is the decision point that I think was a mistake in the game, but I can understand why I did it in the moment. But looking at tape, I think that this was a mistake. So I go after his mana vault here. Or I'm sorry, his mana vault. I go after his mana vault with my prismatic ending, and I think that was a mistake. I should have just gone after the Vexing Bauble, and this is where me not having enough reps in Vintage going into this event really showed. Because if I know that Vexing Bauble is going to be a problem for me unless I establish counterbalance, but I don't have either piece in my hand. I don't have the top and I don't have the counterbalance in this position. And so the thing that's actually going to kill me is if he just gets to go off and combo without in the face of no disruption. But in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to prismatic ending the vault, slow him down, establish my mana base, Mystic Sanctuary back this prismatic ending at some point, then get rid of the bauble, and then we'll actually have the fight that we actually want, and I have the possibility of establishing counterbalance. But that is so far away, and he's already got the mana advantage on me, and he knows that he's safe to go off if he ever feels like it, that Vexing Bauble is just way too strong, and if he wanted to convert the card off the Vexing Bauble in this position, he would be able to go up the card, but the Vexing Bauble would then be off the table, and then it wouldn't be back on unless he starts to go Lurrus, and then we're in way deep territory by that end, and that gives me way more time. And also, if I go after this prismatic ending on the Vexing Bauble as opposed to this mana vault, then it also is saying, hey, I have a bunch of counter magic in my hand that is going to be difficult for you to go through. So like I'm presenting a bunch of information by making this decision to not go after the vault. Like, my hand is pretty stacked to be able to fight if you want to have that fight, by letting you go up a card on this Vexing Bauble, because Vexing Bauble is a horseshit design, and having the worst designs that WotC ever makes are always the ones where they just don't believe in the design at the baseline. And so giving this like 1 mana cantrip out, so that way you never have to like worry about a second Vexing Bauble, it's just really wretched design, and WotC should be ashamed that they printed it. But in this position, me saying you get to go up a card and keep your mana vault is saying I feel really strongly about how good my hand is if you want to have a fight over something, and so you should slow roll what you want to do because you're going to have time, and then we can get into positions where then I get to have more time to establish counterbalance. So this was a mistake on my part, I think. And I know that this is going to go off. There's also like the texture of like if he wants to sack this to be able to protect it and turn on his counter magic. The thing is that it doesn't follow the same story, right? Like if I want to tell the story that my counter magic is really powerful in my hand that I want to keep on, then he is correct to let this go, because he goes, oh, I have 1 force, but if my opponent cares more about this than the Vexing Bauble, then they're suggesting to me that they don't have a strong hand, and I can freely go off, and I can spend resources like this. I can go down a card off of this Brain Freeze to just go for a kill, because my opponent is saying, hey, by going after that vault instead of the Bauble, even if the Bauble would put me up a card, their hand must be soft. So I should try and get this game over ASAP, because as long as the Vexing Bauble's on the table, their hand, which is anemic otherwise, is not going to be able to contend. So in his mind, he must be thinking, Prismatic Ending, regardless of whether or not your hand was good or whether or not your hand was bad, the correct thing for Prismatic Ending to do is still to go after the Vexing Bauble. And so I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here, because that was the agency that I had in this game, and I threw it away. So we're in a position here where the stuff has happened. I want to probe because I want to be able to convert this Ancestral that's in my hand. I know it can resolve, but this is a spot where he can't crack the Bauble because he tapped out for something that's irrelevant. But this was another sequence where I have the stuff. I want to be able to resolve this Ancestral, but then you'll see the Ancestral is just blanked by this Vexing Bauble, because it doesn't matter if I don't draw exactly counterbalance top, then it doesn't matter how much counter magic I draw. Vexing Bauble blanks those cards. They don't have text boxes. So even in this position, it's like, whatever, dude. Like, I don't need to worry about that. Like, it's turning off his Force Will and his Mind Break Trap, but he can decide to turn it on whenever he feels like. It's just like an overwhelmingly dominant position for him to just have this Vexing Bauble on the table. As long as this Vexing Bauble is on the table, it's doing everything that Counterbalance was doing last game for me in spades for him, and he can turn it off whenever he feels like. Like, it is so bad that I didn't turn it on. And also in this spot as well, I absolutely should have fetched. And this is my reps not going. I had agency here where I should have fetched for a Mystic Sanctuary, put the Prismatic Ending on top. Ancestral with the Mystic Sanctuary, draw the Prismatic Ending the Vexing Bauble. He doesn't get to draw a card, and then I have a bunch of these blue cards with Force Will to whatever he's trying to do. But now we're at least at parity. I have mana, and any additional fetch land is another Ancestral on top of my deck. I have this Mystic Sanctuary here that also can convert whatever else back on top of my deck that I needed. I think in my head I was like, I'm going to play this Mystic Sanctuary as a means to get the Prismatic Ending back, but then I just die. It like really, really sloppy all around, and the sloppiness just comes from not having reps and not realizing how backbreaking Vexing Bauble by itself is. Vexing Bauble might be one of the like most egregious mistakes that WotC has ever printed, but it is clear that even as a one of in this spot, it is so overwhelmingly dominant that it blanks so much of my what I'm doing that I just need to prioritize always getting it off the table. And it's one of the reasons why I think a second Prismatic Ending in my 75 in future events is a minimum. I at least want the second Prismatic Ending in my deck, and Vexing Bauble is one of the rationales for it. And like, yeah, so this was a big learning experience for me, but I do end up losing this game. Like, we can go through, but it's just a loop where he establishes Underworld Breach and he goes off and he kills me. So we're still in the Underworld Breach turn, He's going off because I'm realizing like I have Mystic Sanctuary to be able to like loop and go off, or not go off, but I have Mystic Sanctuary so I can like sort of redeem myself a little bit if he fizzles, like if his brain freezes, if he runs out of mana and doesn't find the Black Lotus, or doesn't find enough Moxen to go off. So we play this game. I'm hoping to not find that he misses, but eventually he finds both Sapphire and Mox Opal, which is plenty enough with all of the cards that he had in his yard to be able to continue brain freezing, and then he gets there. So and I asked him, I was like, is the win con just you brain freeze me, right? And he's like, yep. And I'm like, okay, on to the next. All right, so let's find the start of game 3 here. All right, so this opening hand I lead on Mystic Sanctuary. Obviously not great, but I don't want to spend this fetch because I realize how powerful this fetch is. I have Ponder. It's possible that I'm just supposed to go, Ponder, try and find a second land. I know I'm not going to get Wasteland in this matchup, but I have the counterbalances which what I want, and I have force negation to hold up against any action that he might have if he tries to go for a fast kill. And that force negation can pitch a ponder. I have a second ponder, so like I feel like I'm pretty well set up here as long as I can continue to develop. And being on the play, I thought that was a reasonable part on my end. So, but I also know that we're under the clock going into this game, and the odds I end up not showing. As you can see, I don't have Luris on my board. I actually boarded in my Triumph of St. Catherine's now, which means I also need to board in the Luris. It's not something that I wanted to do, but it is something that I was like, okay, I'm going to have to actually win a fast game this time around. The difficult part of the infinite game is the round clock, and so we're playing under the gun. I know that he can kill me a lot faster, and so I decided to keep what might have been a mulligan, but was a strong enough keep to me with little time left. So here I'm just going, okay, I'm going to establish counterbalance, because if he tries to cast a spell into it, it gives me the information for predict, but it also like puts the onus on me. And then like once we can establish that it's there, I get the free flip off this other Mystic Sanctuary, which is not a card that I want in this position, but it does counter the crypt, but it then also gives him the information so that if he wants to deploy something else, he can. And here he spends his Lotus to convert a Thundertrap Trainer, Offspring kicked. So he goes through, he draws his 2 cards. So this is a position where, because we're under the gun on the clock, because games went long, and it's also part of something else that I would also like need to learn, is to more aggressively nudge that once I can show my opponent Luris, to be willing to be like, hey, if you want, like, to the point where I'd be like, I'll show you my deck list. Like, I will turn my deck face up for you if you are willing to concede in this spot where you are demonstrably dead, or answer any questions that you might have about my deck list, or something like that, to incentivize my opponent not being able to actually contend just to save the time, because that time is so much more valuable to me. And it is also part, like, in part, that I think that, like, if countertop miracles or a shell of this kind were established in Vintage already, I think it would be more commonplace for opponents to concede when they know that they're hard locked. Whereas getting information that is unclear, right? Like him playing against the deck list that he doesn't know. And this happened all throughout the day. This wasn't just this Jorgen here as my round 2 opponent. All throughout the day, my opponents were not clear to themselves on when they should concede. It was very clear to me when they should concede, but it wasn't clear to my opponents. And so I ran into more draws in the event on games where I was most certainly hard locked to win, because they just didn't know when to concede. And that is something where I'm like, oh, countertop is just really powerful. People like understand, but it's not a known quantity in Vintage, and Vintage has so many things that are like unknown. Like I was probably the only person that registered counterbalance in the entire Vintage event, right? So it's possible that like when your opponents just don't know exactly what is going on, that they go, well, I think I should concede, but I don't exactly know. And it would also be really valuable for me to know what the sideboard, because you're playing a brew, and I didn't think about a brew when I was putting my sideboard mapping together. So I don't actually have the optimized information to know how to sideboard. And so there are little things that I'm thinking to myself post-event that I'm like, oh, if I had just like had the quick conversations being like, what would get you to concede in this spot because you're not resolving a spell for the rest of the game? What would you like to know? Like, I'll tell you information that like would help you with your sideboarding, or I'll show you I'll like flip my deck over if you would like anything to just convince them that like we shouldn't spend another 15 minutes of you losing or me controlling the game, because we want to be able to play more games. And that is something that I, even after all this time, I'm thinking I'm playing countertop pretty fast. And it's not like my opponents were really playing slow. Like Jorgen here was playing at a totally reasonable pace. A bunch of other players playing at a totally reasonable pace all throughout the day. But it just comes to positions where the goal of my deck is to perpetuate the game, not end it. But my opponent, it's like they are hard locked from ever taking game actions. Like it is a deterministic victory for me to show that like I can't possibly lose. Therefore, by me not being able to lose, you can never win. That's deterministic for me to win. And because I can always point to Luris as a means of like, when you are deterministically unable to win because I can't lose, even if that's not enough for you, I can at least point to Luris and say, that's how I can kill you. And they can go, oh, okay, and then they can scoop. But that still offers them a bunch of time to be like, well, I still want information out of your deck. And if that's a bottleneck, I can be like, hey, I'll show you the information. And it's something that I was thinking about a lot after the event, between flying back and then also like, okay, is this now the time to like do this video and explain like what I learned on the day? I learned that countertop miracles is certainly a viable strategy if it were optimized, but it's also a very, very tricky deck to pilot. You have to know the metagame pretty well. and I did not, and so I was making a bunch of mistakes on that. Um, Knowing how to nudge your opponent properly to say, hey, you can't win this game anymore. What information would you like to concede so we can save the time and play the additional games? And if they say anything from how many of XYZ do you have in your deck to I just want more information about your deck, I could say, what information would you like about it? And if it gets too complicated, I'll be like, I will literally just hand you my deck list to look at before we start game 2 as a means to like incentivize the concession when they are hard locked. I think that's also pretty valuable because a bunch of my cards are going to come out in most situations anyway. And it's also like not a ton of my stuff is surprising. Like even though there's like surprising in like how many Mystic Sanctuaries are running, how many counterbalances are you running, like that is not information that is they're going to sideboard for that stuff anyway. So the number that they have is knowing how many they need to play around, but not necessarily that like this is not something that I need to respect going into game 2. So I don't even know if it's like that much information that they're gleaning from those spots. So this is a game where we are just playing to not draw. I don't find a triumph on my deck fast enough to be able to clock him in time, especially when he's got a bunch of bodies. So I understand that at a certain point I have to play for the draw here. It's still early enough in the event that like a draw is better than a loss. And I also think in this position, once I realized like I hadn't played any games with this deck before this event. And I had a deep fear of initiative in the format because I'm like, well, I'm not playing any creatures really in my deck. And so I'm playing 3 Triumph in the sideboard to try and beat up on, to try and, maintain parity with initiative. But I think that that's just going to be a bad match altogether. But then as we're playing towards this, in this game, and we're going towards a draw, first off, I don't think that the game is concluded one way or the other. I don't think necessarily either of us are ahead in this position because I'm sitting here with Mystic Sanctuary to be able to put something back on top of my deck. And I do have counterbalance established. I think going long because I have counterbalance established, and I know that's what's relevant, that I will end up taking this game down. But there's still so much game to be played that it is unclear. But then I also think now that I go into round 3 in the draw bracket, that it is very unlikely that initiative is in the draw bracket. And so as we're playing towards this draw, I'm thinking, okay, even though I think I would have been able to take this round down, I'm like, it's not the worst to be in the draw bracket, knowing that what's likely to be in the draw bracket is a bunch of Luris. And I would much rather play against Luris than initiative in my head at this point. I think that you can solve the initiative matchup in that like the deck is pretty soft that they don't like they have a bunch of cards that suck and then initiative creatures, and that's it. And so as long as the initiative doesn't hit the table, if the other stuff hits the table, then you're still totally fine because Source Clashers and Terminus are really powerful. And so I think I feared initiative more than I needed to because even though they have 8 initiative creatures, I'm playing consigns in the board, and as long as the initiative doesn't touch the table, then we're relatively favored. So I think in this spot, I was like, okay, yeah, we'll play to the draw rather than either of us taking the concession because it's still early, and I also get to go into a bracket with a bunch of Luris. And so I was like, okay, I'm still live, even though I'm playing with an otherwise soft deck. So we play a little bit longer. I don't know if this is all that interesting from the establishment, but like this is not getting to play the Optimized Miracles game, so I don't know if it's all that relevant, but it is the stuff that it helped me learn along the way. We can fast forward a little bit here. We have some sweet plays using countertop balance. Zach here is behind me as there's a judge call happening, and we're just talking about how sweet it is to get on camera with Vintage Miracles. Opponent plays another Thunder Dart Trainer. Along the way, I had just stacked a Merchant Scroll on top of my deck. He knows that 2s aren't cleared, and now I get to float this 2 for however long I want, and so my opponent knows that it is unlikely. I know that like the way that I lose a potential game in any position is my opponent resolving the Underworld Breach. So here I play Mystic Sanctuary because I want to be able to hold up top and Force of Will, but I decline to use Mystic Sanctuary as a result because I want to be able to hold up a mana for top, 5 mana for the Force of Will, and I'm floating this 2. But in this spot, oh, that's right. I remember this spot. So here I wanted to not have to worry about flipping my top. I knew that 2s were countered, and I was thinking about whether or not I wanted to put a 3 or a 1 on top. I ended up putting a 1 on top because I didn't want to get into a position where he had a full grip where I would have to spin my top for anything. But I think, again, that was ultimately a mistake. I think I should have either declined to use the activation here or put the 3 on top because then I can both spin counters 3s, 2s, and 1s with the top. And if he has a critical 1, I couldn't tell you what that is other than Chain of Vapor. And if he does, then what I could do is just force the Chain of Vapor that I have in hand. And then if he wanted to force back, I'm holding a 5 on top. I could spin and put that 5, that Triumph of St. Catherine that I have there. So I think it was a mistake to put the Ponder on top. It probably should have been this Force Negation in the position where, like, it's the last turn. He's got to go for it. And as long as he can't resolve a 2, then it doesn't matter. And I'm thinking, okay, like, I'll put this Ponder on top to counter a Chain of Vapor, but then he has Flame of Venor, which is what's in the glare here. So he goes Flame of Venor. I don't have a 3 on top, but I could have put a 3 on top by putting in this Force Negation. So now I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to fight with this Force of Will. So I know I'm going to pitch this Brainstorm to this Force of Will so I continue holding up floating mana for this counterbalance. That way I can establish a 2 on top. So I put the Triumph of St. Catherine on top. I Force of Will here, knowing that he's going to force back to fight over this. I'm going to reveal the Triumph of St. Catherine. That's going to counter his Force of Will. He's going to realize that he can't win now because he knows that I have at least a 2 and I have Ponder, Triumph, and a 2 on top that he knows. He knows about the Merchant Scroll. So he knows about the Ponder, he knows about the Merchant Scroll, and he knows about the Triumph of St. Catherine now. So he knows the top 3 cards of my deck. He knows that he's not going to be able to resolve a 1 or a 2 because I have 5 mana open. And so because of that, he's not going to be able to resolve a Chain of Vapor or a Underworld Breach. And so this game is just going to go to a draw. He still plays it out. He tries to make some stuff happen where I'm spinning around. And then now we're talking, he's like, oh, I missequenced. I should have done this instead of this. I should have gone this thing and this thing and this thing. But really what ultimately happened was I have counterbalance plus a bunch of mana. And there's a counterbalance trigger in response to literally every single one of these things. And as long as I have mana with countertop plus a relevant top of library, none of these spells resolve. So there wasn't actually a sequence after the Force of Will on the Flame of Venor that would have mattered with the makeup of his hand. It was entirely covered by 5 mana plus countertop. So it was really interesting games. I think countertop is certainly a viable strategy for Vintage going further. I'm going to take this way more seriously in 2026. I'm actually going to get in games and bring a strong version, a cleaned up version of countertop Miracles to Vintage in 2026. But I hope this was a cool little breakdown of the video and my rambling wasn't too much. And I hope that it was cool to see countertop on camera again and to bring it back and realize how much fun countertop can actually be and how when you play it quickly, it's not actually monopolizing game clock. I think I took up a reasonable amount of time, if not less time, than my opponent in this matchup and across most games across the day. And I think that like showing how it's like, oh, like top just monopolize this game time and like does all these bad things. Like, yes, I don't think top because of Fleshraker and Mystic Forge could be unbanned in Legacy now. It's just like it's still too strong. But I think this is a fun little reminder to like look back and go, it wasn't just like that top was a strong card. It obviously really was. But like the gameplay of countertop in certain positions was really, really rich. And there was a lot of play to how you could compete against it. And I think that's why countertop had lasted in Legacy for so long. And why, like, even if it came back now, I don't necessarily think that it would be too good. I think like countertop would just be way better in Urza Saga packages and stuff like that, and Fleshraker loops. But like to show how rich the gameplay of countertop is and why I fell in love with it and why I still love it to this day. So thanks everybody for watching. This is Force of Will. This was Vintage Miracles, and we'll catch you next time and see more vintage gameplay in 2026. That's what I do.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching. And if you have a moment, please subscribe to the show and like the video. That goes a long way to helping support the pre-modern and legacy content ecosystem that we've created here.
Also, do us a favor and join us at patreon.com/Eternal Durdles. We've separated the tiers, so if you join the Durdle Maniacs tier, you'll get only Magic content, the same great content that you've always enjoyed.
And if you'd like both our Magic content and our Sorcery content, you can join us at the Magicians tier and get both. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.